Okay, so welcome to our first Challenger conversation of 2024. We are very pleased to bring people to you from different parts of the world. We have Penelope Hardy today, who is coming from the US, Gail Scowcroft from the US, and Professor Ed Hill from the UK. We'll have a conversation today exploring the important marine science topic of research vessels, past, present, and future. The idea of the Challenger conversations is very much to explore. It started off with Gillian Wood, who is a professor at the University of Illinois, creating a website that digitized the data from the Challenger expedition. And we host this at SAMS, and we were looking at ways to bring these data more into the awareness of society and into use, both for researchers as well as for educators. And we started, therefore, with the University of Illinois and SAMS. We were looking for a third partner with a lot of experience in education, and we invited my co-host from today, Peter Tuddenham, from the College of Exploration, to join us because of decades of work in ocean literacy. And we've kind of come together to, first of all, explore different aspects of Challenger and take that perspective of bringing new communities together, because communities, if you mix new communities together, you get new conversations. And we in particular wanted to bring together historians with marine scientists and educators. And that is the philosophy that we've used for these conversations. So this is the fourth conversation. We already had 3 in 2023, and we hope to have another 2 or 3 coming. And we culminate this round of our first Challenger conversations at the UK Challenger Society Conference in Oban, where the Scottish Association for Marine Science is based, in September. We hope to kind of bring quite a few of our conversationalists and conversations together at that event. I'll hand over to my co-host, Peter Tuddenham, who will introduce you a little bit to the housekeeping today.
Yes, welcome. Thank you very much, Anuschka. Welcome to everybody who's joined us today. We've had over 60 registrants, which is very exciting. And we're here in a Zoom webinar, which is a little different to a Zoom meeting, and it enables us to gather before the meeting and prepare for this session. And we're requesting that you use the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of the screen, to ask questions of our conversants, please, and the chat window for sharing of any thoughts or resources, particularly that you might wish to share, or information on other related events or activities. And we will go through the 3 conversants, and then we will have the time for answering the questions. We'll do that at the end, and we're going to hopefully run for 90 minutes today, as we have 3 conversants. And I think that's all I need to say at this point. I'm in Northern Virginia, and behind me is the Potomac River, which is a couple of miles away. And that is, I think, all we need to cover for now. We want to hear from our esteemed panelists. Anuschka, back to you.
Indeed, we really have an exciting panel today of 3 people who really know what they're talking about. So first up, we've got Penelope Hardy, who is an associate professor of the history of science, technology, and medicine at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Penelope does research on ocean science in the 19th and 20th century, and has focused on the history of research vessels, I think from before the Challenger Challenger expedition to the middle of the 20th century, if that's right. And all about really exploring how research vessels have been helping us develop our understanding of the oceans. There couldn't be many people who would be better to set us off on understanding where our current experience of research vessels coming from. So over to you, Penelope. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here so I can show you some pictures, because that's always fun. I am coming to you from Wisconsin, La Crosse, the sort of west side of Wisconsin, and my nearest body of water is actually the Mississippi River, which is just a couple miles away. And actually, La Crosse sits at the confluence of the Mississippi, the Black River, and the La Crosse River. So we're surrounded. We have lots of bodies of water, even if they're not oceans. As I think we're all aware, considering the venue today, the Challenger expedition was a scientific circumnavigation of the world carried out on board the naval corvette HMS Challenger from 1872 to 1876. Sponsored jointly by the British Royal Navy and the Royal Society of London, the expedition sounded and collected specimens worldwide, visiting every ocean but the Arctic. It was the first major expedition whose actual subject of study was the deep ocean, and it was very well documented. Extensive archival records exist, holding ships' logs, scientists' field notes, correspondence, as well as voluminous official and unofficial published accounts. So that's how we can know what it was like on the ship and who was there and what life was like on board. Naturalists, this is too early for us to be using scientists or oceanographers, but naturalists had to get creative to get access to vessels large enough to study the deep sea. So they partnered in this case with the Royal Navy, because the Navy, of course, has big boats. HMS Challenger was thus a naval vessel, a corvette with a normal complement of 18 guns and a crew of 290, chosen for its large size, shallow draft, and overall sturdiness. But many alterations were made to the ship for the purpose of being a research vessel. And I will talk about a few of those and can talk about more if anyone's interested. But these included giving the naturalists both cabin space and lab space. Perhaps most importantly, the after cabins, way at the back of the ship, traditionally the sole domain of the captain of a naval vessel, were split between him and the chief naturalist. This allocation of equal private space to scientist and captain really underlined the importance of the ship's scientific mission and worked to subtly shift the ship's identity and the working culture on board. In front of this, new spaces were divided between naval and scientific pursuits. Amidships on the port side, so at the top of this deck plan, you'll see a photographic lab that was set up in two smaller cabins, which served as light and dark rooms for the technicians responsible for this photographic work. And this was really a new thing to have on an expedition at this time. A separate chemical laboratory at the bottom of this deck plan, amidships, was provided for chemical analysis. This is kind of interesting because it even included a glass-blowing forge, which had to be adapted on board when the original didn't meet their needs. And I'm, to this day, trying to imagine blowing glass at sea. I suspect they mostly did it in port. The other laboratory on board was the naturalist's laboratory or workroom. This was what they called a novel addition to the equipment of a surveying ship. And it was outfitted with a freshwater tank and a sink, tools from harpoons to botanical vasculums, and a cistern of spirit of wine, which was the alcohol they would preserve specimens in, were secured in the overhead in netting that was provided, and that way allowed them to preserve specimens. And I'll note that the cistern of spirit of wine was locked because, you know, you can't trust those sailors. A long table down the center of the room provided a convenient place to use microscopes, and they were secured against movement at sea. Work could be done in the light provided from the former gun ports because they took most of the guns off the ship to make it a research vessel. Storage was also vital on board, both for empty bottles that they would later put specimens in, and also for stocks of fluid and for prepared specimens that were awaiting shipment home at the next port. And since they'd taken most of the guns off, they were able to convert the magazines that would have stored ammunition to store instead the alcohol that would be used to preserve specimens. So the gunner's mate, who would have carried the keys to essentially an ammunition locker, now kept those keys to the locked space, but instead his duties now included fetching cylinders of spirit whenever it was requested by the naturalists. 200 crates of specimen jars, a total of 2,300 jars, were procured and packed before departure, with the ship's tinsmith making zinc cylinders for packing larger animals as needed as they went along. They also needed space for lots and lots of rope or dredging line. The dredging tackle and miles of manila line could be deployed from a platform that you see that was built above the upper deck. And a deck house for naturalists sat towards the stern. So when you first got things on board and they were still caked in mud and stuff, you could take it there to start cleaning it up. The ship was crewed with naval personnel, as you'd expect on a Navy ship, plus 7 civilians whom the sailors called scientifics or philosophers. Again, they wouldn't have been scientists yet, so they were natural philosophers, so the sailors often called them philosophers or just scientifics. And these men included naturalists, a chemist, and an artist. These guys all seem to have gotten along fairly well with the sailors, or at least they claim to have gotten along well together. In addition to scientific papers and relatively official narratives of the voyage, several of the officers on board wrote and published memoirs. These reveal some good-natured ribbing between sailors and scientifics, for instance, making fun of the naturalists when they got on board because they did not know appropriate shipboard terminology, and noting with a wink when rough weather early in the trip sent all the scientifics down to their staterooms. When they pulled into various ports, the naturalists and officers, who were generally from the same social class, spent time together visiting local dignitaries or out gathering specimens, which often looked to the naturalists exactly like sport hunting, or to the officers exactly like sport hunting. So they felt right at home if they had gone out hunting at home. But a surprising number of people are missing from this picture, both this literal photograph and the metaphorical picture we have of the expedition. This supposed crew photo, for instance, is in fact only the scientists and the officers. The actual crew is not pictured, and they're the ones who would have done most of the actual labor on board. While individual crewmen do appear in sketches and photos from the voyage, they're never identified, and in fact, they often appear to represent generic seamen, such as these men on this small boat who all have the exact same facial hair, or this cherubic young man who's doing a remarkable job sifting mud in that white uniform, not what I would have chosen to wear for the task. It is telling that we, in fact, know the name of the dog in this image, but not the sailor. The dog is Sam, and he's a Newfie, by the way. Sailors are little mentioned in the texts, and when they are due, it is occasional, unofficial, and mostly anonymous. Though, as both these images and naval practice suggest, they did the bulk of the actual work of rigging, hauling, and maintaining equipment under the officer's eyes. And when a haul like this sailor is sifting through was hauled up on deck and all that sediment was deposited on deck, it was, of course, the sailors who would then have to clean the decks back up. In fact, if we think closely about this photograph, we can actually see another of our missing people, sort of, because someone must have been on the other side of this lens. One of Challenger's many innovations, like I mentioned, was the inclusion of an onboard darkroom to allow documentation of the voyage through photography. And a corporal of Royal Engineers named Caleb Newbold embarked as photographer. Tellingly, we have no photographs of Newbold himself. And we can kind of read even more into his story, even though we don't have his actual words, because when the ship got to South Africa, Newbold deserted, and he was replaced by a civilian named Frederick Hodgson. Again, we have no photo of him. And Hodgson, in turn, deserted in Hong Kong and was in turn replaced by a guy named Jesse Lay. These successors don't appear in the official records. The lead scientist doesn't mention them in his reports. And the desertions and hirings are buried in the pay records. And in a brief mention, I'll tell you where in a minute. But the scientific validity of expedition results and their communication to and acceptance by other professionals relied on the illustrative capabilities of people like the ship's artist and the photographer's lenses, as did the conviction in both public and government that the expedition had been worthwhile. Yet the technicians responsible remained largely invisible. This held true after their return, too, when the ship's artist, J.J. Wild, was excluded from the official publication effort, and he eventually emigrated to Australia, where he found better job prospects. Also, and even more intriguing and not pictured, were a couple of lab assistants hired along the way. One came from Bermuda, and he was a Bermudan man. We don't even know his name. And then as the ship left Cape Town, South Africa, the lead naturalist hired a Black South African as a servant and lab assistant. We know his name was W. Pembrey, but we only know it because he died in Hong Kong of decline, they called it. And that was recorded among the deaths that happened on the ship during the several years expedition. So it'd be great to know more about these guys, but I'm not sure we can recover their stories very well. There's one lab assistant we do know a bit more about. This is Frederick Gordon Piercy, and he embarked on Challenger as a taxidermist and general assistant to the biological laboratory when they left England. And he would have been about 15 years old when they got underway. During the trip, he often went out with the sailors or shore parties to fetch specimens. He made observations, he prepared samples. And upon the expedition's return, Piercy would have been 18 or nearly 19. He was assigned to the Challenger's office, which was set up in Edinburgh to supervise publication of the results. Clearly, he must have been considered a valuable assistant to be kept on the project. And reportedly, one of the naturalists said his alert intelligence and obliging disposition made him a favorite on the staff. But he's mentioned only one time in the official narrative and never in the scientific results. So you have to kind of go into the lab notebooks and things to discover he was even there. Part of this is about our records. As I said, the naturalists, there were official accounts, and the naturalists and many of the officers published their journals. But we have very few records from the crew itself, as these were least likely to leave their own accounts of the voyage. These are the three that I found, and we can talk more about them if anyone's interested. But the most thorough and important of these letters is those of the ship's steward's assistant, Joseph Matkin, and the book that they're included in is pictured in the middle. He wrote home to his family and friends during the trip, and then these letters were unknown for quite a while, but they were collected and kept within the family, and they were brought to the attention of historians in the mid-1980s, when many of them were acquired by the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the Natural History Museum in the UK. Historian Philip F. Rebach edited and published them in 1992, providing the only relatively complete account of life on board from a member of the crew. Though note that Matkin dined in the chief petty officer's mess, so he was not a lowly deckhand. These sources do give us the broad strokes of an experience not caught in the official accounts. And this is where I said earlier that the officers and scientists all claim to have gotten along well and that everything was a congenial attitude. But Matkin records that on Christmas Day, shortly after leaving Portsmouth, a turkey very mysteriously disappeared just as it was ready to go on the table in the officers' mess, and it has never been heard of since. A roast goose met the same fate a couple days later, though some fragments of it were found with salt up in the main top rigging the next morning. Later in the Pacific, the crew staged illicit late-night fights between the ship's cat and the captain's pet cat. And the latter, the pet cat, Matkin reported, generally gets licked. The officers and scientists both report nothing but felicitous relations throughout the voyage, but the theft of food from the officers' mess, the abuse of the captain's hapless pet, along with a soaring rate of desertion that I hinted at with the photographers, but that continued with the rest of the crew as well, suggests that there was an undercurrent of unhappiness in the crew that's not reflected in the official accounts. So we can kind of piece things together to try to understand what life was really like on board. I can tell more stories of the crew's interaction and some fun things about all the animals on board or what happened when one of the tarantulas disappeared. But I want to turn the stage over to hearing about the present and future, and then we can come back to these if desired. Thank you.
Thanks, Penelope. That was lovely to get an introduction to what it was like. Yeah, I'm being a woman, I always notice the complete lack of women on it. But of course, you know, the fact that we only ever hear the stories of, you know, the upper echelons of the top end of the tree is a thought-provoking, and we can probably have a chat how the relationships between technical staff and scientists have changed until now.
Yeah.
So we'll have a conversation later. So we'll go straight over to our next presenter, which is Professor Ed Hill. Ed has been leading the National Oceanography Centre, the UK's largest kind of marine science organisation, for 20 years or so now. So he seems to be there forever. Before that, has been leading an institute in Liverpool. He's by background a physical oceanographer with background in the circulation of continental shelf seas, and has himself participated in over 20 research expeditions, so he very much knows about life at sea firsthand. Half of them he has been the lead scientist, and now his institute is in charge of looking after the UK's large research vessels. So there's very few people who probably could give us a better idea of research vessels today, and his ideas about how they're developing into the future. Ed, please.
Thank you very much, Anuschka, and you can see my slides okay? Great. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm delighted to be part of this this conversation. I suppose you could summarize the topic of my talk is the question, do we need research ships anymore? And I'll give you the short answer, which is yes. But just moving on briefly. So the headline messages are that there are very strong strategic drivers for why we continue to need research vessels, and increasingly a very important science focus in the deep unexplored ocean. Research ships will be vital to ocean science, in combination, though, with a variety of other techniques which we now have to be able to access the ocean to understand its working. However, those next generation of research vessels, which will be part of the landscape of observing the ocean, will probably be very different from today, and will need to be. And so we'll take a little look at maybe what would be different about them. And finally, that the UK science community really should be engaging very strongly in thinking about the future shape and size of our own research vessel fleet as we think about renewing that fleet into the 2030s. The first thing to say, of course, is there is only one ocean, divided into the large basins that the original Challenger explored. And the ocean today is becoming ever more important as it rises up the agenda. It's a geopolitical, economic, security, legal, ecological, technological, environmental, and scientific frontier. And it is becoming ever more important in our lives, whether that be for food security, addressing the questions of climate change, understanding the implications of mass marine extinctions in progress, as well as the great challenge of managing 60% of the ocean, which is beyond national jurisdictions in the global commons. In terms of the ocean's processes, the ocean is variable at all scales, from really microscopic through to planetary scale changes and variability going on in the ocean. And as we'll see later, there are different techniques needed for trying to access what is going on, to understand at this vast range of scales in the ocean. I've marked here in this red square a scale that is particularly of interest today, which is around the scale of an ocean basin at the decadal scale. And that's where a lot of climate change processes are going on. And the techniques that are needed to get at that scale are coming on stream now, and they involve, but don't exclusively rely on research vessels. But for many other aspects of this space-time scale, ships play a really important role. So just to paint this landscape, there are many different ways in which we are now today making observations. Right down at the bottom there, from using measurements that are based around their coasts, looking out to sea with radars where we can remotely sense the ocean, through to satellites in space that can take a very broad view of the ocean, but really only see the surface skin of the ocean, through to, and I'll show you some pictures later, of fixed observatories in the ocean, which can measure in great detail, but at one place, through to a variety of robotic and other drifting and small mobile instruments, which can cover large areas of the ocean, but can only measure a few parameters at a time, and sometimes not as accurately we would like. So within this landscape at the top here, we have ships. We look at the space coverage, the time coverage, the density of sampling, the number of parameters one can measure, how much energy you need to put into the system to measure the property you're looking for. Then each of these different ways of observing their ocean have got their own strengths and weaknesses. They're good at particular things, particular time scales, measuring particular kinds of variables. But research vessels have their particular niche, and they are very versatile. They can measure to full ocean depth at high accuracy. If you need very large amounts of energy, such as putting sound into the sea to measure below the Earth's crust, measuring high volumes of material and so forth, then ships really are pretty much the only way to do this. And including for measuring things where the sensor packages have not yet been miniaturized, because we've only just figured out how to measure something. And so this question of how we measure the ocean as we go forward to address these big challenges is sometimes being posed as an issue of, is this ships versus some of the kinds of instruments you can see in this slide at the bottom. Sea gliders, various robotic submersibles, which can collectively be in the ocean continually, not having to return to port like ships do, and provide us a continuous presence all day, every day. But will these replace ships? And my contention is this is not a question of ships like the Royal Research Ship Discovery that you see here versus the autonomous vehicles. We need both. And what the autonomous vehicles that you see in the slide can do is provide us the opportunity to massively expand the coverage and density of ocean data that we need to recover, because the ocean is grossly undersampled in space and time, but without needing to grow the size of the global research vessel fleet. And there are probably only about 20 very large research vessels in the world. So it's not about cutting the number of research vessels, but it's being able to massively expand the amount of observations we have, but without increasing the number of ships, because there will never be enough ships anyway. So we have to bridge this gap without them. So if you look at some of the very biggest research ships that are operating in the world today, and the Royal Research Ship Discovery, which is operated from the National Oceanography Centre that was on the slide before and is in this cartoon, is one of them. It's over 100 meters overall length, will take 32 scientists out for over 6 weeks at a time. And it's an example of a global class research ship. And these really are the descendants of HMS Challenger. They are designed for science that operates at truly global and all basin scale. And these vessels are designed to go into multiple ocean basins and not just operate in the regional seas around particular countries. And these are some of the characteristics of these global class vessels: long endurance, very significant capabilities, reasonably long durations, and big scientific parties for long durations. And these are the sorts of things that they can do today. Everything from deploying instruments to deploying these autonomous vehicles, taking biological specimens, placing things on the seafloor that conduct in situ experiments. And some of these sampling techniques, although they've become rather more sophisticated, would be familiar to the scientists on HMS Challenger. We were doing very similar things. And the other thing that a research vessel is a massive floating laboratory for processing these samples and analysing data at sea, without having to bring them home, by which time they may well have deteriorated. So they really are big floating laboratories. And this is a very versatile range of things, sampling the water, the seafloor, and indeed the subsea floor, as well as the atmosphere above the ocean. So fantastic platforms and very versatile. But ocean science is changing in relationship to the big challenges I've seen. And so in the 20th century, as a legacy of Challenger, we very much got into a mode of one research ship pursuing one scientific project, coming back and going out with a different party to study different science. We moved away from the Challenger type material of circumnavigating the world, going and trying to sample the whole ocean. And we were very much focused on processes for relatively short durations, weeks at a time, and then coming back doing something different, but because we were looking at the ocean's fundamental processes. But in the 21st century, we're almost going back to the days of the Challenger, trying to take a truly global perspective. And so we need two things: to be able to sample the ocean at global scale, which ships just can't do on their own, using some of these autonomous vehicles. And the slide on the picture on the top right here shows the Argo profiling float array of sort of drifting instruments that go up and down in the water, collecting samples. And these floats alone have made more measurements in the first 10 or 15 years of being out there than all the measurements made by all the research ships in the whole history of oceanography. So that's what you can do with robotic platforms. But they need to work alongside research ships for the things that they cannot do, the dedicated specialist sampling of the kind that Challenger needed to do, and that are people intensive and energy intensive and need particular laboratories at sea. Some of the issues driving change, think about change in the vessels that we need in the future, are things like their carbon footprint. We're trying to study the ocean, but vessels burn a lot of carbon, and they are expensive. Some of those other platforms I've showed you are relatively cheap. Large numbers of relatively low-cost sensors, and so there are attractions in moving to those. But just to look at this, the global carbon footprint of all of the research vessels in the world is less than 1% of all the carbon emissions of the global commercial shipping industry. So, we have to get it in perspective. And actually, the costs of global research ships, if you look at them in context, say, of putting a satellite into space, are relatively comparable if you spread the costs over the lifetime of the ship or of the satellite. So ships are often portrayed as dirty and a very expensive way of measuring the ocean. They are getting cleaner, and they're not as expensive as all of that. Indeed, the next generation of ships, one of the things that will be different about them is that they will eventually be burning greener fuels. And my expectation is that by 2040, we will be able to operate truly zero emissions vessels by no longer burning marine diesel, but by adopting clean fuels, which will never be driven by the research sector, but will come out of transformations that are going on within the shipping industry to develop green fuels that do not emit carbon dioxide. So some of the research vessels of future, this is an example of a pilot vessel, might look a little bit like this. They will burn greener fuels. They will probably have less embarked crew because we will be able to do a lot remotely with telepresence, operating from scientists ashore remotely. And they will be designed not just to do manual handling over the vessel, but to deploy robotic vehicles and be much more automated, and to have fewer crew as they become more autonomous and robotically controlled, operating in a digital environment. But research vessels have definitely gone out of fashion, and these are vessels which have been built within the last couple of years or are currently being planned. So these are the current range of European vessels currently under construction or just recently built. So they are very much here to stay, and these will be around for the next 30 years or so. So in conclusion, we do continue to need research vessels because of their unique capability. In future, they will be different. They will be greener, more automated, operating within a digital environment. Their role will not just be to do science on their own, but to be working within the context of all of the measurements being made by smaller autonomous and robotic vehicles out in the ocean all day and every day, which provide the opportunity to massively expand global ocean observations without growing the global science fleet. And research vessel CO2 emissions can be eliminated. This will be a solved problem, but it will depend on innovations going on in the wider shipping industry rather than in the research vessel community itself. So a little glimpse at the future as well. So with that, Anuschka, I will conclude.
Ed, thank you very much indeed for that comprehensive overview of the state of play in research vessels and ocean exploration. My colleague, partner, Tina Bishop, Dr. Tina Bishop, and myself were lucky to meet Professor Gwyn Griffiths, who is emeritus now from your organization, who's with us today. And we were introduced to the Challenger by work in Bermuda, as it happened, which is one of the stops of the Challenger, where we first encountered the volumes. And that led to a online program that we had 20 years ago, funded by NOAA, believe it or not, on the Challenger and work at sea from the past, the present, the future. So it's great to revisit this topic 20 years later. I would like to also just say that we worked with Gwyn on Auto Sub Under Ice, which was a great program there, and that was another great program. So I now have the privilege and fun of introducing Gail Scowcroft, who I have known for over 20 years, as we've worked together on a variety of ocean science education projects, global ocean science education workshops, which we've done with the College of Exploration and the University of Rhode Island Graduate School of Oceanography, where she is, as you can see on the screen, the Associate Director of the Inner Space Center. And she'll tell you more about that in a minute. We've worked together on ocean education projects too for many years, the Centers for Ocean Science Education Excellence, which she was leading. And we've done a lot of work on ocean literacy together. As we know, unfortunately, the world is not learning as much about the ocean as it should do, in spite of all the efforts. We've got a lot of work to do to educate the globe on the role of the ocean and to reach out to education around the world. And Gail is doing a lot of that as an ocean scientist, as a climate scientist, as an ocean educator in her work. So with that, we look forward to hearing about the future of ocean exploration and ocean education and ocean literacy. Gail, thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to you and Anuschka for inviting me to participate today. It's my delight and privilege. And I'll just start by saying I have an intimate connection with the Challenger expedition in that as a senior undergraduate, I was able to visit a authentic original copy of the Challenger expedition reports. The plates absolutely inspired me, and Ehrenberg's plates of radial area especially, for some reason, floated my boat. And so I spent the first half of my career doing climate reconstruction of the ocean using radial area. So thank you to the Challenger. I do have one other connection to another Challenger, the Glomar Challenger, which I sailed on in the 80s and survived Typhoon Betsy on. So this work is near and dear to my heart. I have a long lens on seagoing research, having been involved for over 45 years in this enterprise. And currently, I have the privilege of being the Associate Director of the Inner Space Center, which is a national facility that serves the U.S. Ocean Science Research and Education Enterprise. We serve the U.S. Research Fleet, as well as some oceanographic exploration vessels. It's the only facility of its kind in the world, and I'll be providing an overview of what the capabilities are and how that's influencing seagoing research today. So a little bit of history first. In 2004, the United States Commission on Ocean Policy recommended that the country expand its ocean exploration program to be led by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Science Foundation. And part of that mandate was that public outreach and education had to be integral components of the program. And so in 2009, the first Ocean Science Exploration Center opened at my home institution, the University of Rhode Island Graduate School of Oceanography, as part of the U.S. movement to expand our capabilities for ocean exploration. And part of our mandate was to include and integrate ocean science education and outreach. So what we do, we provide all sorts of telepresence support for ships, underwater vehicles, for operators of those vehicles, and for ocean scientists. And this is just a list of the types of engineering that we do, but I'm going to focus on the last bullet, which is the general expedition support that we do to engage scientists that are not at sea, that are at shore, something that Dr. Robert Ballard calls doctors on call. We also do a lot of live interactivity, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. So, but first, how telepresence works. So there are data feeds that are transmitted through fiber optic cables from deep sea vehicles to research ships. Now, these are tethered vehicles. These aren't the autonomous vehicles that we saw on the dock of the slide Ed showed. But these vehicles are capable of sending all sorts of data up those fiber optic cables. The ship's computers receive those signals, decode them, send them up to satellites in space. Then the satellites beam those signals to us in the Inner Space Center, where they're then encoded and streamed over the commodity internet for any computer in the world to receive. And when we started doing this, it was very cumbersome and often didn't work. And now it's absolutely seamless, and all you need is a computer to be able to receive the feeds. And that journey from a few miles under the ocean to your home computer via the Inner Space Center and what we do takes under 2 seconds. It's magic. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how it works, but I'm very happy that it does. So this is a slide that shows our mission control facility. It's much like NASA's mission control. We can control all the systems on the vehicles, that underwater vehicles from here. We can capture data in real time and send it to scientists anywhere in the world in minutes. And we can also in real time connect scientists at shore with scientists at sea, and also connect the scientists at sea with museum audiences, classrooms, and the general public. We have in our shop, in addition to mission control, we have a fully equipped video broadcast and production studio. We have on our team a professional video production side of our house. And from this broadcast studio, we can facilitate live interactions just about anywhere in the world. It's been streamlined, as I mentioned, so that we can do point to point, or we can stream just on YouTube. And our video production team is very skilled at capturing the live imagery coming in from undersea or data feeds, and then integrating a beautiful video in seconds, so that it actually is a beautiful program. It's not just talking heads anymore, one head to another head. In addition to the U.S. research fleet, as I mentioned, we service 2 oceanographic exploration vessels, and that's their class exploration vessels. These are the 2 that exist in the United States, the Okeanos Explorer and the Nautilus. And these vessels operate quite differently than the regular oceanographic research vessels, in that they are not project or mission based. So normally a scientist will propose to a funding agency that they want to do a specific mission or project at sea, and they need a vessel to do it, and that's all coordinated by agencies in various countries. And so the scientist gets aboard with their gear and their team, and they go and they tackle that mission. These exploration vessels actually go out and do just that. They explore. They have transects that they go backwards and forwards. We call it mowing the lawn. And they're looking for whatever they can find, because as we all know, the ocean has not been explored to the degree that it needs to be. And so there have been many discoveries made by both of these vessels, and they're currently still working. And these are global class vessels like the ones that Ed showed, and we absolutely continue to need these kinds of ships. So the Inner Space Center has had the benefit of partnering and partnerships with many different facilities around the world, not just within the US. These partnerships have enabled a lot of discoveries, as I mentioned. Our partnership with the National Deep Submergence Facility has allowed video and data feeds from many vehicles to be shared around the world, and allowing many more scientists than just those at sea to participate in the expedition in real time. Often we partner with other institutions and organizations for specific missions. And for example, we partnered with the US Navy and the Deep Submergence Facility to locate the container ship El Faro, which went down with her crew in a hurricane when she was trying to sail to Puerto Rico. And those kinds of things, we're called all the time to just kind of have our team jump on planes and meet ships around the world to do these kinds of projects. We have a great partnership with NASA. In 2018, NASA began looking for corollaries to life on other planets, particularly in hydrothermal vent systems of the underwater volcanoes. And these locations look a lot like what we'd find on other ocean worlds in our solar systems. They're prime candidates to potentially support life. And so we've been working with NASA ever since to explore these kinds of environments undersea. In 2019, we partnered with the Swedish Polar Research Secretariat, and this was actually, I'm the PI on this project, so it's one of my loves, to conduct the Northwest Passage project. We went into the high Arctic where ships had not been before, and we were able to do that because of climate change and the warming and loss of ice up in the high Arctic. Our team was actually at sea on the Odin, conducting the expedition from start to finish, and we were able to broadcast from the ship every day from high latitudes where no one had been able to connect before. God bless our engineers that figured it all out using very low angle satellite connections. But we broadcast to the public every day of the expedition, as well as we had interactions with museums several times a week around the country. And the public had, for the first time, a bird's eye view of what scientists are doing when they're at sea in these extreme environments. And we had actually, when the discovery was made by our scientists at sea of the first plastics ever to be found in Arctic ice, we were in the middle of a broadcast, and that was really incredible for the public to be able to experience the excitement of that. 3 months later, we went down into the Arctic. We sailed on the Lawrence M. Gould, and we were able to test that same technology that we used in the high Arctic down in the Antarctic. And another miracle, it worked. And we were, for the first time, able to connect people at sea in the Antarctic to scientists aboard ships. Currently, something that is changing the face of ocean science research, both seagoing research and other types of research, is the technology that is quickly being developed. We are also home to something called the Ocean Exploration Cooperative Institute. It's a $150 million project, if you will, but it's very complex. You can imagine with that size budget, but it's focused on the development and testing of new technologies that are helping us to explore the global ocean. And we are a central partner in this cooperative institute and helping to connect scientists around the world as equipment is being deployed and tested and so forth. So with a lot of this new technology, we are able to visualize data in rapid time in very high resolutions that we have not been able to resolve in the past. So this is part of the, I believe, the future of oceanographic exploration. With the advancements in technology, we're able to see, if you will, things that we have not been able to see before, and by being able to connect people in real time to ships, both the scientists at sea and the scientists ashore, people are able to make very good, efficient decisions about where to send the ship, where to send the instruments, where to direct the ROVs, and so forth. Lastly, I'll just talk a little bit about Telepresence 2.0, which we are in the process of developing. And this is mainly to work with the new low Earth orbit satellites, because these satellites are allowing far greater connectivity than the few satellites that we have been able to use. It will allow us to connect regions that had no satellite coverage, or where there were satellites, but the angle of connection was too poor to really do anything in high definition. And so our engineers are currently developing this capacity, and we'll be testing it this field season. Finally, we are in the presence of outfitting 3 new research vessels. These are regional class research vessels that will be coming online. 1 will come online this year, and 2 will come online the next year. They will all have the most advanced telepresence technology and allow the public to have a bird's eye view of what's going on at sea. And I personally feel, because obviously I live in this world of research and education, I think it's really important that we allow the public to see what's going on, because we need support for our enterprise. There's 25 times the amount of money goes into space exploration that goes into ocean exploration. And the more people we can get behind what we do, the more we'll learn about our own planet. And so with that, I say thank you. And again, thanks to Peter and Anuschka for inviting me today.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for giving us a glimpse there into the future. It's staggering. I'm just sitting here thinking about the stories that Penelope was sharing, and how over 150 years we've gone from sailing ships and that view to where we are today. And if you think about it in the scope of time that humans have been on the planet, what we've done in 150 years is absolutely staggering. And where we might go and all of the challenge associated with it, which it does come down to education. And just before we began the session, we were in the backstage area and we were talking about lamenting in a sense that K through 12 education is becoming less oriented towards earth science and ocean science, paradoxically. And in universities today, there's more interdisciplinary work. And you can see from the presentations by Ed and Gail, the amount of data that is available and is going to be monumental. So having the skills for the future in big data and artificial intelligence and technologies of this kind is going to be crucial. So perhaps we could begin a conversation with our conversants here between us, and encourage those of you attending to add your questions in the Q&A, and we will present them to the panelists. And if I can work the technology, we could bring you onto the panel as well, if that is something you'd like to do. So Gail, maybe I'll just start with you and say, you've had some experiences actually going out to sea and so on, and this whole inner space experience. Can you just sort of tell what's probably been the best benefit or the most important benefit of the technology, this telepresence technology, in the way that it's reaching the general public and students in schools?
Thank you, Peter. Yeah. Well, first, I'll take a step back and say that I think one of the huge benefits is allowing many more graduate students to have a virtual at-sea experience. It's hard for graduate students to get ship time because obviously scientists need to get to sea, and there are only so many berths. So it starts right there. And then working backwards, as I mentioned at the end of my presentation, we're able to engage people, just regular, average, everyday people. And it blows our mind when we're broadcasting live how many people are interested in the ocean. And if you have to understand what you love, right? And if they have no knowledge of the ocean or what ocean science is capable of doing, it's very hard for them to be supportive and think of themselves as stewards and part of the ocean world. And we also are able to work a lot with education professionals, both in classrooms and in museums. And that, again, you're just widening the aperture of people that can experience and become involved. And I think it's critical.
Yeah, thank you. I can't help contrasting it, Penelope, with what you were talking about in terms of the life at sea. And one of the things we've been talking about here is life at sea. And what would you say we can learn from studying the history there for life at sea today, and encouraging young people to take an interest in going out to sea or studying the ocean?
Well, I would say, directly tying to Gail's point, that some of the reporting on what's going and the contacting the public really was a part of getting more people interested, even as far back as the Challenger. We saw articles about the Challenger published everywhere, from Punch magazine, which was a very satirical British magazine. Think of it maybe as the SNL of its day, right? All the way up to things like Popular Science that would report on what's going on the Challenger. What have we learned about the deep sea? And Scientific American was reporting about it. So that sort of getting that message out to the public was very important to them as well, both because they recognized that was important to introduce future researchers and make this a topic that people were interested in, but also because they recognized the funding sources really relied on people thinking this was important to study. And so the more people you could interest in this, the better. The other not quite direct link, but that struck me as I was listening, was the tie to sort of global communications networks, because one of the tasks on board Challenger, while they were doing this ocean science for these naturalists, is that the naval officers were doing a lot of sounding and improving charts And one of their primary reasons to do this was so that the British Empire could lay telegraph cables so that they could improve global communication. So there's absolutely that sort of thread, or maybe cable, that runs through the story all the way to the present as well.
Yeah, the lower orbiting satellite promise that Starlink and others offer, and Gail's point. Ed, let's turn to the work of Southampton and the UK fleet and activities. I was talking a couple of years ago with a colleague who was lamenting that the country was going sea blind. Yet on the other hand, you have a national TV program, with David Attenborough and talking about the planet and so on, the blue planet. What's been your experience in engagement in the ocean studies in the UK?
Yeah, thank you very much. This phenomena that is called sea blindness is one that is very real, and there's been a number of reports have referred to this and asked the question why the British are afflicted with this disease. Given that we're an island nation surrounded by it, there's nobody in the country who lives more than 72 miles from the sea. And yet, and it's a huge part of our history, and our favourite topic of conversation is the weather, which is entirely driven by the Atlantic Ocean, and yet we just take it for granted. I think it's almost so familiar that it's become just something that is perhaps taken too much for granted. And I don't think it's a uniquely British phenomena, in the sense that more generally, I don't think people recognise the impact that the ocean has on their everyday lives. Everything you were talking about, fibre optic cables there, which transport, it's 99% of the data traffic that's going on in the world. There's a very, very small fraction of that happening by the satellites and systems like Starlink, and yet it's just invisible, and it is an invisible world, and most of the life in the ocean that actually matters really in terms of the function of the Earth system is microscopic. So it is a hidden realm in so many different ways. It's hard to see it. Most of it's below the surface, and what goes on it is hidden processes. So this is why I think the work that was described by the Inner Space Institute there is just absolutely phenomenal. We just do have to find more and more creative ways of engaging people and bringing home the message that the ocean really does matter. Now, Attenborough, amongst others, really drew this issue of ocean plastics to public attention, and that was a great achievement, where suddenly people could see that in a very visible way. There are probably more important ocean problems going on in the ocean in terms of pollution and plastics, but it was very, very visible, and you could see there was a very sort of visceral connection between people and the ocean, that they did care when they could literally see what was happening. And so, whilst this sea blindness phenomenon is there, I'm sort of reasonably hopeful that this situation, when it matters, when the chips are down, that people do care ultimately about the ocean, and will rally around it, as we've seen in some of these examples, like plastics, and there are others as well.
Can I ask a question about emotional connection to the marine environment? Because I think so one thing, Ed, you've been telling us that yes, ocean scientists will continue to go to sea, but probably not as often as we have in the past, probably not as many of us as have in the past. How important is being at sea to creating that sustaining kind of connection that makes, at least, because I think that's one of the reasons why, as marine scientists, why do we care? Why do we see the connections? Why does the public not see that connection? How will that change? And then, Gail, on the other hand, of course, what the changes bring is the ability to see something that in the past we've not been able to see. Even as oceanographers, you get things up, you don't see them in the environment. And will that help us actually, despite being further away from the place, create that emotional connection? That probably then means that we'll not have that ocean blindness, and probably will see greater engagement.
Yeah. Do you want me or Ed to answer?
Both of you, one after the other.
I'll go second. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that obviously the public does not get to go to sea on research vessels very often, right? That's a rare occasion. But I do think an emotional attachment or appreciation is probably a better word, can be engendered by the rich and beautiful imagery of what's going on under there. We haven't until the last 15, 20 years really been able to bring that in front of people in any sustainable way. And now we do. Watching the faces of children when they see a Dumbo octopus fly by in its own habitat in real time, and hearing the scientists aboard the ship see a critter that they've never seen before, and you hear the scientists saying, "What is that? Oh my gosh." I think people can gain an appreciation on an emotional level to what's going on under there. But I think that's just one step along the way. The ocean literacy movement is imperative because, as Ed was saying, you've got to help people understand the importance of the ocean. And yes, that can be engendered with imagery, but education is critical in helping people understand the whys and the whats and the how that they can participate in keeping the ocean of their own planet in a condition that will be semi-sustainable. So education is also important.
Yeah, and Anuschka, just in terms of the scientific community, I mean, there are many stories and experiences of lifelong friendships and collaborations being built by people being on the same research expedition, together, and it's a great level of being at sea. You just have to muscle in and actually, as was clear in the days of the Challenger, you realize very quickly that you can't work alone when you're at sea. It's a team effort. Everyone on the ship has got a role to play, and that breaks down lots of barriers and some of the academic snobbery that perhaps some other areas of science are a little more afflicted with. And at least in the UK, but I think it's more generally, that the ocean science community tends to be quite cohesive and collaborative in their mindset. And a lot of that is built from the experiences of going to sea. So yes, it is a risk that we will lose some of that, and indeed, there are signs of it already in some degree. So I think that's a shame, and it's sort of really important to have that connection. But you do have to counterbalance that with the sort of the democratization and the increase in diversity, because the number of people who can go to sea, even as scientists, is quite a small group, and opening that up to people for a variety of reasons would find it difficult to go to sea is surely a good thing. So we've got some balance going on here. So yeah.
Let me pick up a couple of questions here from John Gould and weave them together. And he's asking about international cooperation and mentioning that the Challenger and SMS Gazelle in 1876 took some complementary tracks. And I remember that, Ed, one of the times I met you was in Galway for the Galway Agreement between the EU, the UK, Canada, and the USA, which is an effort to coordinate efforts. And so this global work now is in a sense, somewhat contrast to HMS Challenger, which was obviously a British Empire-led point. But I would like to point to maybe Penelope. Maybe Ed, you can talk about the international piece and the cooperation, and then Penelope, perhaps follow up with a piece about how the scientists sent the specimens out to multiple locations around the world, and how the Challenger actually did sort of build a global sort of sense of cooperation around the study. But Ed, if you could address the first question there from John.
Yeah, yes. I mean, there is very significant global cooperation in oceanography, and a huge amount of sharing of data and samples and those kinds of things. I think John's question is more specifically about the ships and the coordination of the planning and the operation of those. And it's a very good point. There are very good examples of where it has happened, and John will know better than most because he was deeply involved. That the World Ocean Circulation Experiment, which happened in the last decade of the 20th century, was a very fine example of a strongly coordinated effort to deploy research ships to sample over that decade the entire global ocean. As those big projects, and there were others like that, particularly at that time, sort of gave way to other things, then we sort of retrenched more into this sort of national deployment of assets. The cooperation is very clear there in some of these autonomous systems. You know, the Argo profiling float program is an absolutely classic example of observing the ocean collectively through very coordinated deployment of assets. But it has somewhat retrenched in terms of the use of ships. And I do think that is a shame, and I do think it leads to inefficiencies. There are coordination mechanisms, there are ship barter arrangements, and there are particular shorter-term projects where you know, there are multi-ship activities that come to coordinate. But I think at the global scale, we do need to do better in this area, and it is very much, I think, triggered, as it always was, by having very clear projects where there is a multinational endeavor to do a particular thing, and that's perhaps the bit that is missing in the system at the moment. The real focus is around the legacy of the World Ocean Circulation Experiment in terms of a program called GoShip, which is a coordinated sampling of defined transects of the world ocean. That is very well coordinated between ships. But there is more that could be done at a larger scale. And perhaps as the ships see themselves in this wider observational ecosystem, something more coherent may emerge out of that, because they'll be a very important part of deploying big parts of the global observing system for systematic observations.
Penelope, what was the history of sharing?
Yeah, so I would like to go back even further than Challenger, actually, to 1853, when a U.S. naval officer named Matthew Fontaine Maury, who a lot of people may have heard of, helped coordinate an international conference that was held in Brussels that was known as an International Meteorological Conference, but really they were already thinking ocean atmosphere system. And so a lot of what they were talking about were sea temperatures and currents and winds and things like this. And that conference led to an agreement by all the countries in attendance to have their ships gather data like that and then share it. So really, international efforts go really back pretty far. I should note that Maury also was a big proponent of slavery, so he's not a 100% great guy, but that effort is really interesting. And it's also interesting because some of the data that they collected is now useful to us today as we look at anthropogenic climate change. And we have this sort of picture of data of the global ocean in the 1850s, 60s, 70s because of it. But the Challenger expedition too, aside from going around the globe, when they got back, they had collected so much data, so many specimens, that it now needed to be processed and written up into results. And what Peter was referring to was that this, the naturalists leading this decided that the best way to do this would be to sort of divide it up and send it to experts in the field, no matter where they were. And this was a bit controversial at the time. A lot of people in Britain thought, wait, this is a British thing. We paid for it. This is a British nationalist project, really. It should be British through and through, and that's who should process these results and write the results. But they've really held firm and decided, no, we could, if it's someone in Germany, if it's Alexander Agassiz in the US, we should send results there or have them come here and help process those results. So the results volumes were the work, not just of the people on board, but of really this really international cast of experts who were analyzing them. And they then incorporated a lot of data that came from places that were not just the Challenger, but that was work that had been done since. Then as these results were printed, they also identified places around the world where those results volumes should go. And so sending those out, and we've had a couple references to where these results volumes ended up. And they're at Harvard, and they're at the Smithsonian in the US, and places like this. These two helped to build oceanography, early oceanography, as an international science from the get-go. So really that history of internationalism and cooperation goes way back.
But can I ask whether so I find this really interesting, because we talk about the international collaborations, but there's also a huge amount of inequality still there. I mean, Penelope kind of was talking about it in the context of just the class system. But if you're looking, when we're looking early on at the various super duper research vessels, they're still the old colonial powers pretty much still dominate that. We go with our big research vessels all around the world, and has it changed? Has it actually? Are we in some way still very colonial in our research efforts, or are we any more equitable in international kind of context?
Could I jump in on that one?
Please.
So there is one great example of international collaboration, and that's the International Ocean Discovery Program. It used to be called the Deep Sea Drilling Program. And there are many nations that are involved in that program. And in terms of colonialism and who's the heavy hitters, I would say, yes, the US and Europe still have a lot of ships, comparatively speaking. However, China is now outpacing certainly the US and even perhaps the collective European fleet in the number of research vessels that they are bringing online and the number of ocean scientists that their institutions are producing. Australia and New Zealand are involved in the drilling program, for example, and they've got their research ships. India is involved. Japan is involved as well. So I think the ocean research enterprise is certainly much broader than it was 20 years ago. And I think there's a lot of pressure, at least the US is feeling a lot of pressure from what's happening in China, for example. So we're no longer the only game in town.
Yeah, and Anuschka, just to support what was being said there, it's certainly true that these big vessels, the global class vessels, which are a really important part of the story, they are concentrated in the wealthier countries, the G7 plus the emerging economies. China is very, very strong in this area, as been described. But I think that sort of is going to stay for some time. But oceanography, I think, is opening up and becoming more diverse and more inclusive because of other things. In terms of ships themselves, the National Oceanography Centre, but many other big institutions are members of the Partnership for Observation of the Global Ocean. And one of its main strands is around capacity development. And they run a program for enabling scientists from developing countries to get access to these big research vessels and to spend time on it. And indeed, there's a joint Pogo Nippon Foundation program, which is absolutely about capacity development, in which going on board these research vessels and understanding how they do science at sea is very much there. So that is certainly opening up access to the research vessels. But then I think the other big trend that's going on is the way oceanography is opening up, in the sense that for some aspects of oceanography where autonomous systems at low cost, for some key elements of oceanography, you don't actually need a ship to make some big progress. And this is really opening up the possibility for a number of developing countries, if you like, to skip a technology generation, if you like, to be able to use, gliders and various other things to do some of the key measurements in their ocean areas that they need to manage their resources without having to have a big vessel. And I think that is very much opening up oceanography as well in a different way.
Yeah, and I'd just like to mention a really cool what I think is a really cool example of how many nations can be involved, whether they have ships or not. And that was the World Ocean Census that took place for 10 years. 119 countries participated, developing nations, the rich nations, the 119 countries. And scientists from all of those countries got to go to sea. Many nations contributed ship time. It was really an incredible program, as I say, that lasted for 10 years. And I think that programs like that, the census ended in 2010, but programs like that could happen again. It certainly introduced a lot of people to seagoing research that would never have had the opportunity to go to sea before.
Yeah, let me perhaps weave a couple of thoughts together here. Nick has made a comment about the original work of Sam's coming from the Challenger expedition, and John Murray being the first director. And the Institute was funded by people in the general public who were interested in all of this. And I think this question of engagement of as many people as possible in this endeavor of understanding the oceans is our real challenge. And a couple of examples come to mind. One was something sponsored out of Germany, which I was engaged in cooperation with the UK. It was called Ocean Sampling Day, which was a great endeavor to get general public going down to the beach and literally collecting water or collecting ocean seawater and then sending it to Germany for analysis. And then the other one is these programs that involve young people, something called mini boats or educational passages, where young people launch boats, small boats into the sea, and they go off and measure the water temperature and get other data. So engagement, I think, is a crucial part of this. And if I can try and weave that together with a question here from Azra Meadows about tourism, I don't know if you've got any perspectives on, how to engage students, how to engage the general public, but also this idea of tourism, of hotels under the sea. And I know that a colleague many years ago at the University of Connecticut was talking about building hotels under the sea, and there are some around, aren't there? I haven't been to one, but engagement. Let's just talk a little bit about engagement, if we could, for hands-on experiences. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think World Ocean Day is grown. It's very big in Europe. It's big in the US. I think having the day that people are conducting hands-on activities for audiences all over the world is something that we could leverage. But that's a one-day, one-shot event. I think we know from research that we've done in COSI that in order to really get people to change their attitudes and behaviors, there needs to be sustained engagement. And so I think it's really important for folks at the oceanographic research facilities around the world to have education and outreach programming where they form relationships with museums and school districts and so forth, so that there can be a longer term relationship. And we know that those are the most effective ways to get people to change their attitudes and behaviors related to the ocean. So it's up to us. We have to do it.
Can I ask a question about innovation? Penelope, when I'm thinking about the Challenger expedition, and I might be wrong because I only know about Challenger, but it seems to me that innovation was massive there, because every bit of sampling equipment had to be kind of thought up pretty much and tried out and so on. While, you know, an awful lot of the technology that we use in oceanography since I've started hasn't changed so much, apart from in recent years when a lot of things have come on. But a lot of the ones that we've had is a little bit like Gail and Ed said, that a lot of the innovations actually don't happen in ocean science, but we adapt other technologies that are developed elsewhere for oceanography. Are we more innovative today, or were they more innovative in the Victorian times? Or what are your thoughts on the degree of innovation, the type of innovation that we're seeing?
I think there too, we can see a thread all the way through. Certainly, Challenger or the Challenger naturalists were borrowing things and then adapting them to fit their purposes, both from naval practice, and it helped. I mentioned the tinsmith who was on board, who was making containers to send specimens home. There's also a blacksmith on board. So when a dredge or some other tool doesn't work, they can work together to innovate and change the design so that it works better for their purposes. And they had already brought on board things that they got the dredge from oystermen. They got trawls and nets and things from fishing practice. So there is this long history of borrowing things from various other laborers who work at sea for other purposes and adapting them to do scientific things, and then taking things from one scientific setting and saying, okay, we were using this in the North Sea, but can we use it in the much deeper Pacific? And what do we need to do to adapt with that? We're dredging and getting great stuff, but what about when we're on a rocky bottom and not a lot's coming up? How can we adapt that? And frequently it was the naturalists working with naval officers and naval craftsmen on board who were able to sort of make those adaptations. And it was sort of an always work in progress, that there became somewhat off the shelf technologies, but they always ended up being adapted on board as well, for the conditions they actually met when they got out there.
Yeah. Anuschka, if I might say a word about that as well. I think you also have to look at innovation across the whole value chain, if you like, from sensor or package that's in the sea, right through to the data. And maybe at different times, the innovation happens in different places along that value chain. So I think it's sort of the sensor end of things. There's some really exciting things going on around, biomolecular observing systems. The Decade of Ocean Science has got an endorsed program called OBOM, which is very much about biomolecular measurements in the ocean, use of environmental DNA and so forth. Scope here to absolutely transform the way in which we do biological research in the ocean. And then, of course, we are really at the cusp of the sort of the big data revolution in ocean science. You know, for a century and a half, our problem has been we've had a dearth of data. We needed really creative scientists to actually build some picture out of these very few data points we've got. We are, because of some of the innovations in the sort of sensing technology we've got, we are really already experiencing some of the data deluge from the ocean. That's not to say that some of that sampling isn't biased. It's very heavily biased to the surface ocean as opposed to the deep ocean. But the whole scope for artificial intelligence to be able to analyze not only samples but a lot of digital imagery, which is simply impossible for human beings to make sense of, I think will also lead to very interesting and new interpretations of the ocean, just because we'll be able to visualize and understand and make sense of these very large data sets. So the innovation is as much in the data as in the sensors at sea, if you look at it in the whole picture.
Yeah, and I would like to add that both of what Penelope and Ed have just said funnels into an issue that we have across the world, and that is we need 10 technicians for every PhD ocean scientist because of all of the instrumentation that we now have, because of all of the data coming out of the ocean exploration and research. And we have focused for most of my lifetime on producing PhD ocean scientists. And so we have a lack of technicians and people and data analysts. And so going forward into the future, if we don't do something about that now, seagoing research, autonomous vehicle enabled research is really going to be lacking greatly, because we need the people. And so that's something that we're working on in the US is workforce development. I'm sure it's going on in other countries as well. But we're in a crisis because of the volume of data and the incredible instrumentation that we now have.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's one of the goals of this whole series of conversations, is to build our network of people interested in this topic, and to look forward at the end of this series, the last one in May, we're going to be talking about where we go in ocean literacy terms and in ocean science terms, and then have a face-to-face meeting in SAMS at the Challenger conference at the first week in September on education and the needs such as this. So that's a wonderful thing to see emerging out of these conversations. I'm conscious, Anuschka, that we're already over our 90 minutes, and as ever, it's great when you get passionate people together, have a conversation, which is the goal of this. We could probably go on for another half an hour or hour, but with due respect to our speakers and our attendees, I think we need to draw this to a close for today. I'd just add my personal thanks to, my friend, colleague Gail, and my new friend Penelope, and a colleague Ed Hill, who I've known for many years in cross paths. So thank you all very much for contributing today. Anuschka, if you'd like to close us off.
Yes, and thank you also to our audience who've come up with some lovely questions, and I still got so many, but that's a good conversation. All the best conversations, you walk away with new thoughts. So yeah. Thank you very much, and we will see you to the next Challenger conversation in next month.